Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to episode 16 of season 14 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalog, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Today's a special conversation or episode that I had, or a guest episode that I had with a friend of mine, Josh Caldwell, who is a musician, massive music fan, a gearhead, a guitar nerd, and a guy I met through my friend Corey Morrissette and his podcast, And the Podcast Will Rock, which was a podcast that broke down the entire Van Halen catalog song by song. Great show. I think I've shouted it out a few times. Corey's been on the show. I would definitely recommend checking that show out. And Josh and I became acquainted through being on panels on that show and through just online communications. And we've ended up being pretty good friends. And we chat really, really often about guitars, about guitarists, and about music in general. So I wanted to get Josh on to talk about his background with guitar, some of the guitarists he admires, and then talk a little bit about Mike Campbell and why Mike Campbell was such an important part of the Heartbreakers. What his guitar style was like, some of the equipment that he may have used, and some of those little nitpicky, nerdy things that are fun to get into with someone like Josh. Josh is a great guy, like I said, very, very knowledgeable, and we had a wide-ranging, rambling, probably a couple of hours chat, which I've trimmed down a little bit for you, but I've left most of it in place because I think it was, again, one of those natural conversations between two friends that I hope you enjoy as much as I did. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Josh Caldwell.
Tom Petty. Tom Petty Project. Tom Petty. Hey, Tom Petty Project.
So we should tell people before we dig in, really, that you and I know each other through listening to one of our favorite podcasts, And the Podcast Will Rock, which
Yes.
is a podcast about Van Halen. And
Yeah.
you and I both share a love of Ed Van Halen. You're a guitar player, you're a podcaster, and I thought, who better to bring on to talk about guitar specifically, and specifically Mike Campbell's guitar playing, than my pal Josh. So that's why you're here.
Okay. So my my I mean my introduction to music was my uncle, who is a guitar player, took me and my mom in after my after they split up from my dad. So I was at a very impressionable age, between probably about 4 to about 7 or 8 years old.
Oh,
So
okay.
we were living with my uncle. There, he had a cover band, and they just set up the rehearsal in the living room.
Right.
So, when I first had my very first play date with, whether it was kindergarten or first grade, I asked, "Where's the drum set?" I just thought that's what everybody did. Everyone had a band in the living room.
Right.
I didn't I didn't watch Laverne and Shirley or whatever the popular shows at the time. It was just the band in the living room getting ready for gigs, and it was, at the time, the late '70s was great for music.
Yeah.
I mean, as maligned as it was for disco, we had Tom Petty doing a duet with Stevie Nicks, and Tom Petty keeping up with her,
Right.
which is amazing. And you had the Eagles, you had the Doobie Brothers, you had Steely Dan, and you had all this amazing music. And that's where the connection with Alan Holdsworth, because the other guitar player in my uncle's band is also a really good friend of his, who eventually built guitars for Alan Holdsworth. So that's my connection to Alan Holdsworth. And then reading interviews with Mr. Van Halen referring to Alan Holdsworth as a huge influence. Again, it's like, oh, well, there's a connection there.
Yeah.
And and obviously having hearing Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, getting Mike Campbell and hearing those tones, and then hearing little tech talk between my uncle and the other guitar player who's a friend of mine and who's also a gearhead, and then talking about certain effect pedals and you know glowingly talking about Mike Campbell's use of tones and textures to accompany the music. Because if you listen to the different, like even his guest appearances, let's say on um, you know a famous Eagles solo record,
Yeah.
Boys of Summer, that was the template for that LA studio guitar sound. That's
Yeah.
on almost every record that
So
slightly pushed compressing. Go ahead.
how much of that do you think though is because there's two parts to that, right? With Boys of Summer, when you think about that song
Yeah.
specifically, there's the guitar tone itself is fantastic. And Mike just finds this beautiful sweet spot. But then the song itself also is huge. So
Yes.
if the song, let's say the song hadn't been a hit, maybe that tone would have kind of maybe slid under the radar a
Oh,
little bit and not been used quite as much,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's it. I mean, I can't think of where that tone didn't make it to. I can't. It almost everybody used that tone because it was the quintessential, like, okay, you have this heavy synth sound that was very prominent in the 80s, and then you have this guitar sound that's coming through that kind of is still very organic.
Yeah.
And like if not to disparage the track, but if you listen to the Top Gun theme, it's almost all 80s. It's got the 80s synth, and it's got the 80s synth bass,
Yeah.
and it's got the electronic drums, and it's got this direct guitar sound. So everything is in from that time. Whereas when you listen to Mike Campbell, it's kind of like we're taking communion in his tabernacle of tone, and it all and it's the like the challenging part I had when I was I, as I was getting asked to play on people's demos, they weren't asking me to do my Van Halen stuff because I wasn't really good at that.
Right.
I they're like, when you really bend those strings and shake that note, do that. I was like, oh, you mean clapping? Yeah, 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 do that. And so I would have to find sounds that could kind of fit with that wasn't necessarily my interpretation of a Brown sound. And that's where I started leaning on, people like a Mike Campbell that can play tastefully. And it's challenging to, we've talked about this before, where, people want to go more and more and more, whereas Mike is just enough.
Yeah.
It's just enough compression, just enough grit, just
Yeah.
enough push to, because otherwise it's kind of like when you're trying to make a very subtle dish, you can accidentally add too much sugar, which maybe that's something you experienced when you tried like pastries from a U.S. bakery versus maybe a bakery in, I don't know, Germany or somewhere, and there's a little too much sugar or a
Right.
lot too much sugar. So, and I think that's really where uh, you know when we're listening to the good book Tom Petty being delivered by Mike Campbell, it's just they have this amazing cohesion. And even when like Jeff Lynne suggests, like, yeah, we in there's a Ring Down a Dream when he plays that extended
Yeah.
solo, he's like, yeah, can you give us a little Clapton? And so I think that's what Jeff asked him to do, and his interpretation fit right along with. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around here,
Yeah,
but
no, that's good. That's good.
if you listen to that particular track, right, you can hear like the really dry acoustic guitar sounds, but then the lead guitar track has a lot of ambience, a lot of reverb, and then you can hear him hitting those really big notes. And again, this is when I go back to my uncle, who was kind of he wasn't in tune with all the music that I was into, but he would point out it's like those big notes. That's what echoes against, you know, a huge stage, an auditorium.
Yeah.
You know, when you're playing in a big amphitheater versus a small club.
Well, it's funny how that informs how you play, right? The room
Yeah.
that you're in can inform that. I just want to jump back to that because you talk about, if you're around musicians playing in your uncle's living room and you're a kid, and that is, I had the same thing with my dad. I used to go and sit on fruit boxes, big boxes of fruit in my uncle Dennis, who wasn't my uncle, but he was our friend, and in their band, and you see guys hanging out and playing. It sort of normalizes creativity, doesn't it? It sort of gives
Yeah.
you that freedom as a kid and a license to think, well, okay, well, that's something that people do,
Mhm.
and it's not, you shouldn't be embarrassed about it. You shouldn't be self-conscious about it. People get together and they play music. So do you
Yeah.
think that experience, how formative would you say that was? And what type of music were they playing that you were around and exposed to in that live setting?
Well, I remember specifically, they rehearsed at another person's house one night, and they set the amplifier on top of a coffee table, this Fender amplifier.
Right.
And for me, that was normalized, and for my mom, that was normalized. We didn't realize that was, the feet from the amplifier were going to mark the coffee
Yeah.
table, and someone had a real problem with that, rightfully so. But just, and I remember the Eagles song "There's a Heartache Tonight." I
Yeah.
remember that just over and over again, them playing it. I thought it was so cool to hear, because my uncle's more the rhythm guitar player, and uh, his name was Bill DeLapp, that eventually went to build guitars for Alan Holsworth.
Right.
He was playing the lead stuff, and I could hear it coming through. And I was like, oh, I was too young to know at the time, but like my uncle's guitar sounds very different from, I referred to him as Uncle Bill, as his playing, and they were so, but it worked together.
Yeah.
And I remember, so I think the music was so good then,
Yeah.
the late '70s, pop music, because they used real players, they used real instruments. And, whereas like on a Steely Dan record, Steve Gadd had three different drum sets brought to the studio to figure out which one they were gonna, you know,
Right.
that kind of access. So yeah, I was spoiled on that kind of music, but that definitely affected how, probably my biggest influence is Van Halen,
Yeah.
but maybe I don't embrace the entirety of Van Halen adjacent music.
Right.
Whereas Tom Petty, um, for me and my friends in high school, we came from all different types of music. At that point, Van Halen was not considered metal. It was Sammy Hagar, and any metal leanings was long, long past.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they were into,
There's no atomic
Metallica.
punk by that point, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. It was Metallica and Anthrax and stuff like that. But we all kind of agreed that Tom Petty was a cool contemporary expression that we could
yeah.
share amongst each other, and that's what was on our tape decks.
But I think the other thing about that too is, and my mate Randy talks about this all the time. As a guitar player, and especially when you're learning guitar, you like the guys who are just pyrotechnic and are sort of at that level where you think, oh man, I wish I could play like that. But what
Yeah,
you want is the guys who think, I think I could learn that. And
yeah,
it's still super cool, but I think I could learn that. And I think I could learn American Girl. And I think I could
yeah,
probably learn the Licking Breakdown. It doesn't seem like it's from a different world.
yeah,
I was going to ask you too, because I think that, musicians, you can teach someone how to play and you can teach technique and you can teach, all the little bits and pieces, all the bells and whistles.
mhm,
The bit you can't teach is that innate ear. And so I think that, when you're talking about listening to your uncle and the other player playing off each other and recognizing those that they have different tones, you have no vocabulary as a kid to
yeah,
articulate that, but it
yeah,
seeps in, right? It sinks in, and
absolutely.
it comes out then later on when you start playing that you just understand that there are dynamics between players that you need to find so that you're not stepping on each other's toes and you're not getting in each other's way. And I think those all the great two guitar bands, and Petty and Campbell I always sort of throw in there as they don't get mentioned enough. They have that
Yeah.
because they listen. They're always listening to what the other person's doing, so they're understanding how to play off them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, in um, certain songs that Tom Petty does. I mean, like when we're going off that list, I mean, that first one is like it's just like a little waltz. You could picture a woman dancing to it, and you could hear a woman singing the guitar melody lines.
Yeah.
And that's again, as a little kid, I'm starting to hear like, okay, you know this is different from some of the other bands that are playing. This is different from Boston. This is different from some of the Bruce Springsteen,
Yeah.
and they all have their unique voice. Where as I got into more technical guitar players, unfortunately, the bands themselves, I kind of only listen to it for the technical guitar
Yeah.
skills,
Yeah.
and that's probably why maybe someone might enjoy Van Halen, but they maybe not embrace a Dokken or certainly not a Motley Crue or anything like that. But um, and that's where, like, when you have a Mike Campbell who's very tasteful in the amount of gain he's using or the amount of effects he's using, we can hear the different textures. We can enjoy the different flavors that are being presented to us. Because if you listen to the different Tom Petty records, I mean, the album Rick Rubin produced is very different from the one that Jeff Lynne produced.
Yeah.
And it's still Tom, and it's still being filtered through his vision, but the sonic qualities all have a unique place for it, and I enjoy that. I love the rawness that Rick Rubin had, but I also love the almost when I hear the Jeff Lynne produced things, I always feel that like it's carefree and it's not caustic,
Yeah.
but at
I
least
think
it's like um, it's very easy listening. It's almost like you're being put into a massage chair, and he's just kind of
well, he's a great
relaxing you and
he's,
giving you these melodies.
he's a great pop writer. Right? I mean, the thing that
Yeah,
I found that surprised me when I got, I mean, because I've been listening to ELO, like another band I grew up with, right?
yeah.
Because my dad's a guitar player and Jeff Lynne's a guitar player, but you don't realize until you really listen to Full Moon Fever, Into the Great Wide Open, and to a certain extent, the album that I just finished, Highway Companion. Jeff Lynne stacks up guitars. There's a
Oh,
lot of guitar being played on a Jeff Lynne record. Like there's, two or three different acoustic parts, and
yeah.
there, the one part will be mixed really, really low. It'll be just doing one specific accent, but it's all there because he constructs. He's a builder, right?
Mhm.
So again, it's when you talk about guitar albums, you'd never say Full Moon Fever. No one would say Full Moon Fever, and yet as a guitar player, when you listen to it, you go, yeah, there's a lot going on in there.
Or on the Traveling Wilburys. I
Yeah,
forget the track, but there's one acoustic track that's tuned down really low,
right.
like and then you have a contrast. Let's say AC/DC. There's one track,
Yes.
and it's it, but that quality, that real rawness was on the Rick Rubin produced album,
Yeah.
and that gave it a different texture. It was more like it was kind of more hitting you right between the eyes.
It's such a clean production. I mean, what I love about Wildflowers, and I mean, he did three albums with Petty, Wildflowers, Echo, and then Songs and Music from She's the One in between. But Wildflowers in particular, you can hear, first of all, you can hear the room on the drums, which I always love. We talk a lot offline, and you know how much I hate fake, crappy sounding drums. And the
Mm.
drums sound so crisp and present. You can hear the room, and then everything's mic'd and balanced and EQ'd out so well that you can hear. I mean, even on the cymbals, man, you can hear the decay on the cymbals, right? How many Def Leppard or Motley Crue or Kiss can you hear the decay on the cymbals? It's not the point of the song. So I was going to ask you about that, where what we talk about with Campbell versus someone like, you sort of invoke Motley Crue. And the guitar player's name I can't. Mick Mars, that's his name, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Who's venerated guitar player and a sort of a good hard rock guitar player. But I always get the sense when I listen to those guys that they're kind of just waiting for the solo. They're not really that bothered about the song, which I know is probably unfair, but you always get that sense, right? Where with Campbell, it's always if this, let's say the song doesn't need a solo, well, I'm not going to play a solo. I'm going to
yeah.
listen to the song and play what the song needs, you know?
Well, if we can go back to Van Halen for a second, if the his compositional sense was so good
Yeah,
that if you just used let's use Running with the Devil and Why Can't This Be Life? Very minimal solos, just kind of like a little melodic motif.
yeah,
And if let's say we distilled Eddie's solo output to that, I think he would we would still be glowing about Van Halen records, even if it didn't have all the
yeah.
guitar flash. Because if you bring up someone that's not a fan of it, it's like, oh yeah, it's a guy that goes on the tapping and
Hoodla
the
hoodla. Yeah,
dive bombs and stuff. But if you really get to the compositional sense, and then at times you can hear him backing off, the volume knob. You can hear these textures and stuff, which Mike Campbell uses very well.
yeah.
And that's that. So I see a lot of parallels between them. Their the sense of their position, their role in the band.
Well, Ed, I mean,
And,
Ed had the pyrotechnic flair, but he was a songwriter, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's
yes,
always been we've had that conversation lots before
yeah,
offline. That's the difference for me between him and a Vai and a Satriani. Ed was writing songs that people
yeah,
would dance to and people would enjoy and engage with and remember and hum. Where
yeah,
Satriani and Vai are probably ahead of him, technically, I would say, in some senses,
yeah,
right? They can probably do
sure,
things that Ed couldn't do, but they didn't have that little indefinable thing where you go, that's first of all, every guitar player is going to cream their pants over it because it's just
yeah,
incredible. Women are going to love it and they're going to dance to it. Everyone's going to, and it'll go in the charts where you don't get that
yeah.
with a Vai or a Malmsteen or, all those kinds of guys.
Oh,
They
sure.
don't quite have that same musicality in their songwriting, maybe.
There's only a couple of guitar heroes that had diamond selling records. It's a really short list.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
generally, they're generally more songwriting driven. And if I get back to another guitar player we both love is Brian May. Now,
Yeah.
Mike Campbell and Brian used similar amps. They used the Vox AC30s.
Right.
And so, from my understanding of like a Marshall is Class AB design. So and then
So
a
what does that mean?
Vox.
For people who aren't sort of gearheads, in very layman's terms, what does that mean in AB design?
Okay, so Marshall's AB design, and then Vox is Class A. So imagine you're at a stoplight. The light turns green. You have to press on the gas with the Marshall to get it going. Whereas if you're at the light waiting for it to turn green with a Vox AC30, you're just taking your foot off the brake.
Right.
And so it's going to have a different sort of attack. So, and I believe like with the Vox, that's why you can get these really interesting long sustaining notes without a huge amount of overdrive.
Okay.
And and if you can hear that a little bit, you can probably hear, if you really listen closely, you can probably hear tones that Brian May and Mike Campbell kind of share
Okay.
accidentally, but you
Right.
can kind of hear it. And especially those, when Brian plays those long sustaining leads and they kind of interweave, and he's a genius on top of just,
Yeah.
he just happened to play guitar, he's just, and Mike Campbell, you can hear that too with some of these, he's really like almost, we talked about it in the notes a little bit. Like, almost like a lap steel.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you can hear it when he's playing like a particular solo where when you hear him play a legato note, it has a certain effect, but then when you hear him pick it gives you that lap pedal steel kind of sound.
Right.
And that's that's those are the moments you just want to have the red light on at all times.
Yeah.
And you don't even tell them you're printing it. You're just hitting record, and you don't interfere with the musician himself.
Yeah. Well, there's a, we talk about this lots with, and guitarists talk about this lots, that, and you're a gearhead, and it's great because you understand how changing a voltage by, 1 volt's
Oh,
going to change impedance, and it's going to do all these kinds of things. But ultimately, what that's doing is it's letting the guitar player find that, I'd always call it the Brown sound that he was always looking for. It's finding that sound that sort of allows what they're trying to say to come out. But at the end of the
sure.
day, as we all know, it's in the fingers, right?
Yeah.
Betancourt famously said when he got
Yeah.
to play Eddie's guitar through Eddie's amp, and he said, I was devastated because I just sounded like me,
Yeah.
right? So,
And the thing is, like, as a player, even if you're not playing through your rig, you will modify your technique to push that out.
yeah,
So, Nuno, credit to you. You you went ahead, regardless of who, you're playing through the master's setup, but you were going to sound like you.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and that happens with a number of musicians. I mean, I know I get into a lot of the technical pieces of equipment that Ed used to create these sounds, but you know instead of using a modified Strat, let's say he used a Les Paul, we would have been glowing about
of
his
course,
use
yeah,
of a Les Paul in that first record. So, and if if Brian made if he grew up in the U.S. and didn't have access to a Vox AC30, we'd
right.
still be glowing about what he produced. So, a lot of times it happened to be what they were given and they made the best out of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was actually too because Brian's Brian May's a bit of a weird one too because Ed Van Halen loved guitars and he wasn't. I wouldn't necessarily say Ed had like 250 guitars. He wasn't that guy, but he still had a lot of guitars. Someone like Mike Campbell's 300 guitars and he just sold 100. He's still got a bunch of them. Do you ever trust a guitarist who only owns like one or two guitars, or do you think you're not really a guitarist, man? That's just a tool to you now. You know what I mean?
It's interesting with like Brian is just he's got so many switches on there out of phase, and so it's like he has a bunch of different guitars in that one guitar. Um, that's going to be a mystery to me because he gets like these really heavy guitar sounds,
Yeah.
and then he gets these really pristine, almost like that. Is that a guitar,
Right.
or is that some sort of synth sound you came up with?
Yeah.
And and Mike, the some of the live introductions he has that leads into don't come around here no more.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we just went through Mike Campbell's Robbie hanging out with Robbie Shankar phase, and now we're hanging out with Jimmy Page, and now we're going to Jimi Hendrix, and it still sounds like Mike, but it's all these different interpretations. Oh, and now we're going into this song
Yeah.
that's going to be presented, and it's I'm blown away by everything he has at his ready, and he can do it with this seamless abandon. As the old musicians refer to as legato,
Yeah. Yeah.
like the note sings into the next one,
Yeah.
and that's something that Mike Campbell has absolutely complete control and mastery of.
Well, we'll get into that one because I gave you, I'll tell our listeners, I
Yeah,
gave you 8 songs to listen to, and so we could sort of have a framework for having this conversation.
sure.
Because the thing about one of the things that I love about Mike, and you talked about Brian May, Brian always sounds like Brian because as soon as you plug in that red special, like you said, it can make it sound like different. It can get different tones out of it, but it still kind of sounds like the red special. And especially if you're playing with a sixpence, the attack on the strings is just different to anyone else. And so Brian May sounds like Brian May. Eddie Van Halen sounds. You could pick it out of a lineup a million miles away. Stevie Ray Vaughan, I would put into that bracket where the tone itself is just so characteristic that you know who you listen to before they've even played. Right? I'd say that Mike he's not that guy though, right? Because he's got that shapeshifter thing where it's like, well, there's no point me playing, the pride and joy tone in
Yeah.
the middle of breakdown because it'd
Yeah.
just be weird.
Yeah.
Because the Heartbreakers weren't that band where they were doing this. It
Yeah.
wasn't rinse and repeat, and they didn't have that. They weren't doing exactly that. Mike had to be able to change that, and I think that part of him being a bit of a gearhead as well, and being
Yeah.
sort of super interested, just being into guitars, that allowed him to say, well, I think if I plug in if I use a Strat or a Tele for this, that's
Yeah.
probably going to be a bit better for a Gib than a Gibson, or it'll make me feel different about the way I'm playing it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
With I almost see that like Mike Campbell's like a character actor, whereas
Perfect.
whereas like Van Halen is he,
Yeah.
he's showing up as Van Halen no matter what.
He's Ben
Like,
Stiller, right? He's got
yeah,
three
yeah,
things and he's going to do one of those three things. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's or Stevie Ray.
Yeah.
You put him on a dance track for David Bowie, and who's his? Oh, you brought someone from Texas here.
Yeah.
He showed up. So, um,
And that's not to diminish either, by the
oh,
way, too.
absolutely
We
not.
should say, yeah.
And for Tom, I'm sure having someone at his disposal to like conjure up all these different textures and
Yeah.
layers and like who brilliant act Michael Caine,
Right.
that level of acting who can morph into these different things,
Yeah.
and that's how I see Mike Campbell. And I know it's like with when I was trying to quote unquote make it, um, I was I was starting to lean more towards like I don't know if I want to be a Guitar Hero.
Right.
I don't know if I want to be in that limited scope. And I imagine these guys, they're a Guitar Hero has to be stuck with a singer.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
imagine.
Who wants to deal
you know,
with those guys, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I saw myself as like I want to be able to uh, approach music with like here, this is what I can offer on this track. And that's kind of what I want to go through. So I started to collect pedals and seeing what things can use, and that's where um, I was thrilled to when I bought a pedal from my friend. He goes, "Oh yeah, uh, Mike Campbell and uh, Tom Petty and Timothy Pierce are checking these out too." I'm like, okay, I'm finally ahead of the curve, for once. So
Let's talk about
yeah,
that a little bit then, Josh. What does your career as a musician look like then? Because, like you said, I suspect that you wouldn't. Like you said, you weren't the guy who's going to put on the leather pants, take your shirt off, get up at the front of the stage, and be that guy. Because you're much more from all our interactions, very philosophical about guitar, and you're a musician's musician in that it's the music itself that gets you off rather than all the byproducts from it. So was when that when you sort of how quickly did you find that? How quickly did you find your musical center to be able to say, yeah, I want to play in that type of band?
well, I really try. I mean, I wanted to be the next Guitar Heroes, and I saw, um, you know, like you don't look like them. You're
Right.
built like you're built like something else.
Right.
You look like a cop, and yeah, and things like that.
We can be in
And
the village people.
yeah, yeah, and 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 interacting with them, I even getting to work backstage and starting to see how they interacted. It's and the grass is always greener. The Guitar Hero guys, they were like they envied the guys like Mike Campbell. They
Yeah.
could play. It seemed like nobody liked lead singers, especially lead singers from metal bands. Nobody liked them. So, and I started to see, a manager did talk to me and said, "Look, we already have a Eddie Van Halen, and we have a bunch of people that tried to follow his footsteps. We don't need that. We need songs."
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, and that's where I got into like Jellyfish and
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
things like that. So, and that opened up like, oh, there's all these other textures and things that we can play with, and it doesn't involve me, sitting with a metronome and going up and down the scales over and over again to fine tune and clean those up. I could, um, start to look at the guitar not just as like position to position to position. I can see the whole neck and see what kind of textures and things I can add to it.
Yeah.
And even if it's a standard, D major chord, maybe I can find it on a different spot on the neck to give this particular verse a little bit different texture than the last one.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's that thing of, and Mike talks about this in his book, right? Because Mike's influences were all the old guys. I mean, it's all your Elmore James and Chuck Berry and all the foundational, the rock and roll guys,
Yeah.
and trying to, if you look at, I would say Nuno Bettencourt again, I'll go back to him and talk about, because he sometimes I've heard people call him an Eddie Van Halen clone, which is ridiculous because he doesn't really play like Ed did. And I think that that's because, if that's his starting point, then he uses that to sort of, okay, I'll get that down and then I'll figure out who I am. And that finding of your own sound and your own personality with your instrument, that's the critical bit, right? Because if you think about all the players who anyone really cares about, none of them are clones. They've all got, you can hear your Clapton, you can hear your Jeff Beck, you can hear your Dave Gilmour, you can hear Brian May, you can hear Ed, you can hear all those guys in there, but they've taken it just to sort of springboard off and do something else. And those are the guys that we're all interested in. No one cares about the clones, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, who wants the bootleg version of?
Exactly, yeah.
And I know, with my, I mean, my introduction to Van Halen was, I think the first time I heard it was Pretty Woman was playing, and I was riding with my father and my brother. At that time, I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. My brother was still in the car seat, and he was really rocking back and forth. I didn't put together that Pretty Woman was a Roy Orbison song. It just had this really cool groove to it. And then a couple years later, Jump was on major, it was being played nonstop on MTV. I saw these guys that looked like, they look like the same, they look like human characters of, the Muppet Show band.
Right.
They look like them. I mean,
Electric Mayhem.
I mean, Dave looked like Animal.
Yes.
The same expressions, and they were completely non-threatening.
Yeah.
Like, that was my idea. Oh, I thought that's what a metal singer was supposed to look like. When I saw Iron Maiden, it completely changed. But my babysitter said, "Oh, that's the best guitarist in the world." Oh, I didn't know there was that distinction. I had no idea. But to me, they were just having the time of their lives.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what, for me, it was kind of a drawing to that. Like it was unadulterated. It didn't seem to be programmed, and that's what I got out of certainly Tom Petty and Mike Campbell. It was like, there was no filtration process from, what came out of their fingers and their voices that made it onto tape. There wasn't that interference, and that's something I wanted to capture. And as I was trying to play like Ed, he started talking about his influences, and so I gravitated towards Clapton, and then I found Beck, Hendrix. They're better. Clapton's great, but they're better.
Yeah. And Peter Green, people, we talk about Peter Green.
That one was, that was, well, I shared one of his songs once, and that was, that's being that's being baptized. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's jump into them because obviously you're part of the talks about, and the podcast will rock is where we met, and there's the big ecosystem of podcasters and podcasts that you're involved in, and you guested on that show lots of times, and you started your own podcast probably about 6 months ago now. So the Engine Room podcast. That would just break down what that is for folks and what you're doing on that show.
Okay, so basically what I'm trying to do is do a peek under the hood, just to see what ingredients these different artists use to create their sounds. And a lot of roads lead back to Ed, because that's kind of a mysterious, how do you get a really big, bold, distorted guitar sound with clarity. That's
Yeah.
it's really, really difficult. And so a lot of roads lead to that. I've had, a singer songwriter come on, and we've glowingly talked about Tom Petty and different people, and how we approach, creating music. And that's basically the gist of it. Is I want to take, because there's so few words that describe music.
Right.
Because, like, someone will describe someone's tone as creamy.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
So, and that's basically what I'm trying to do, is just basically how do we take this, these elements that we gravitate towards and basically divide it to where someone can understand. They can be like, oh, okay, yeah. Even though that guitar sounds huge and distorted, it's actually very clean. It's
Yeah.
what frequencies are being pushed.
It's interesting too, isn't it, when you use a word like that, and I find when I'm doing my episodes on on the songs in the Petty Canon, and I have to talk about the way Mike's guitar sounds, or the way Tom's guitar sounds, or
Yeah,
the way how his bass sounds, you find yourself in that position where you're like, I don't know how to communicate to people, not even sometimes the way it sounds, but the way it makes me feel.
yeah,
And creamy becomes a thing where you think, well, I know what that means to me, and I think it'll probably translate for most people, but that can mean something different to other people too, right? Where
yeah,
creamy to me might mean, oh, it might mean a bit, oh, it's a bit smooth and it's a bit thick maybe, or
yeah,
it might mean this, or it could mean that. But so I love that idea of exploring the language of how do we talk about music, even how do we
yeah,
explain what we're hearing, because that's the fun part of it, and that's what us nerds, that's what we do all the time. All the messages me and you have offline between, it's all about this kind of stuff, right? We always
yeah.
talk about the nerd stuff. So
So, like, in you know, one thing I encountered when, there's always like a couple degree separation between me and Ed Van Halen, and I would talk to people that, one of my friends that built pedals, did all of Ed's pedals, the EVH brand,
right.
and I would talk to him, and I was like, oh, so what, you know, um, what kind of what kind of player was Ed? You've mentioned I have a really soft touch. He goes, oh, he played really hard,
Right.
really hard. I was like, okay, I don't. There's one less thing I have in common with Ed. I fundamentally, Ed was, he liked Marshalls. I really like the Marshall JCM 800. He goes, oh yeah, he hated those. And things like that. And um, you kind of find like, okay, this is my this is my voice, this is my little part of the universe I get to govern, I get to steward, and I can get inspired by all these different people, and
Yeah.
you learn to be a fan of yourself, and that's kind of, you know what I've discovered, just talking to these different artists, and breaking down the gear, and and talking about, um, all these ingredients to make a particular, um, instrument that's going to project their best selves,
Yeah.
and that is always an interesting, road to hoe. I had two different people. I asked them, I said, okay, why don't you build me the perfect bass, build me the perfect guitar, and one gentleman was born in 1968 and one's born in 1966, but they grew up on the same stuff, and they basically echoed the same ingredients for that guitar,
Right.
the same woods, the
Yeah.
same pickups, the same everything. It was so interesting to hear, two people that, they're aware of each other, but they never really, talked about these things, and they had a
Yeah.
common thing. And, um, even, someone that has a very, like, a different guitar sound from Eric Johnson to Ed
Oh,
Van Halen, but, one person offline mentioned, he goes, well, with his guitar, if he has the tone knob on 5, that's Eric Johnson. If he brings it up to 10, that's Ed.
right.
So and that's just, it's like a filter, so it's allowing more frequencies to come out. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that's fantastic. So, yeah, these things you discover, and yeah, you end up sounding like yourself
Yeah. There's
at the end of
something
it.
there's something too that's unique. I've always found about unique about guitars. Drummers have it a little bit. Keyboard players a bit less. Is the guitar itself it's such a personal thing. Like the way a guitar looks, they're so they're works of art in and themselves. They look great, and some guitars look like trash. And you think,
Yeah.
well, even if it sounds great, and a great guitarist will still play it if it sounds great, but they probably wouldn't go on stage with it if it looks like trash. But unless you're Jack White and you're playing that bloody crappy plastic, Sears guitar that he plays, whatever. But I was going to say, like, because a guest that I had on a while back, and I've definitely talked about this before on the show, but I think you'd find this interesting or maybe get your thoughts on it is this guitar player, this blues guitar player, a lady down in that I met down in Gainesville, and she said the difference for her between a guitar and a piano is you have to go to a piano, you have to go and sit at a piano, you pull a guitar toward you, and
Ah,
you sort of you embrace it, and it becomes there's a different relationship with something that you're holding that close, and again, a piano, my keyboard, I've got my Korg X3 here.
yeah,
If I hit that E note, it sounds the same every time I hit it, and I can change the velocity and that and whatever.
sure.
But depending on how humid your room is, depending on how old your strings are on the guitar at that time, depending on exactly what the tuning is, if it's just slightly out of tune, exactly how much vibrato, it's going to change what that instrument sounds like. And so that relationship to it necessarily just becomes a little bit, I think it becomes a little bit richer for a guitarist than most of the musicians.
And, and I think guitar players we obsess over gear probably more than any other musician.
I would say
Um,
so, yeah.
uh, uh, George Lynch, big hero of mine. Um, he says I always go back full circle. I go back to what I played when I was 17.
Right.
And it's the same stuff. He goes, and I'll go and try to find that that holy grail, and then I'll go back to where I was. And but he said what for him going through that process rejuvenates that original source.
Yeah.
So he says, yeah, he said, he's a little bit older than Ed, and he's talking about this is like, why did I even bother, copying these licks? I should just go back and, play Jeff Beck's Truth.
Right.
That's what I was doing in my basement. And, but he's obviously developed a style that's a little bit different from Ed's, obviously does a little different kind of accents, which you got exposed to with, Lynch Mob on UCC,
Yeah.
which I apologize for, but
Oh
that
no.
was my
Well, and I mean, that's the thing, right? We should touch so for people who don't know, UCC is one of my other podcasts, the Ultimate Catalog Clash. And one of the things we do there is it's kind of like a Patreon through a coffee club. We let our supporters suggest albums, one-off albums that we'll cover. And Josh had given us an album by Lynch Mob called Wicked Sensation, and I really enjoyed the guitar playing. Didn't love a lot of the lyrics and didn't love some of the songs, right? But I think where I was getting to there is I still think listening to that is a valuable experience, right? Because I think it's Edison's light bulb. I think listen to more music and listen to music that might be outside your wheelhouse. You'll sometimes pick up and think, actually, that's super cool. I like that, or I like this specific element of it. Or you might just say, you know what, I can put that on my list and say, yeah, that's not for me. So I don't need to pursue
yeah.
that band or that. So I think it's still, even if it comes out and it's a 60 out of 100 or a 70 out of 100, it doesn't matter because it's still a worthwhile experience, I think, right?
Or hearing there was a benefit for Jeff Porcaro, and then hearing Ed glow about meeting George Harrison
Yeah.
and glowing about how those simple textures and melodies that
Yeah.
George has.
Yeah.
And then George returning the compliment, glowing about Ed.
Yeah.
And that's and the thing is, like, we're all built so different, and so it is a physical instrument.
Yeah.
Guitar is a physical. So another a real close friend of mine who played with Racer X,
Okay.
which is if there's a band that's ever over the top, they went way past that. Now, my friend Bruce Boyer, he um, played with, he did the harmonies with Paul Gilbert, and Paul Gilbert has these huge hands. He's a very tall man, and he said that Paul's pinky was his middle finger.
Right.
So he's doing these incredible stretches, and he actually at one point couldn't play guitar for almost a decade because he basically ruined his hand playing in that band.
Oh, wow.
So he's always really stressed, like, hey, don't fight what you naturally gravitate
Yeah.
towards,
Yeah.
and be have your own voice.
And that comes to, when you're talking, and again, you talked about George Harrison there and Campbell and Ed had that too. There's when they get into, once they find out their sound and they know who they are as creative people, as musicians, there comes a stillness to their personality where when they're being interviewed, you can tell they're not trying to impress anyone with what they know and whatever else. They know that they're at the top of their respective tree. They're happy there. And what I always find is that those are the guys then who they want to help everyone else. They want to share, and it's not because they want to show off. It's because they're super into it. They're into like, well, yeah, do this, and they're super encouraging, and try that, and do this, and talk to this guy, and then watch this guy, and listen to this record. And you know what I mean? So you get that rather than get out of here, kid. You're not at my level. Those guys who've got that stillness, those are the guys who you should listen to, and follow them and try to emulate, and
Absolutely.
Okay, well let's get into these songs. I gave you 8 songs. So before we dive into and start going track by track, I think about half of these probably you would have known. So you would have known Breakdown, I'm guessing. Don't Come Around Here No More, of course you knew. Running Down a Dream, of course you knew. You Wreck Me, I would guess.
Yeah.
And then the other 4 probably not.
Yeah.
I would have guessed. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so first question then before we dive in generally. Was there anything in the set of songs that I gave you where you kind of went, oh, I didn't realize Campbell had that in his locker? Like I wasn't expecting that, or was it all sort of, well, of course it's Mike Campbell can do anything, and so it didn't surprise you?
I, I don't know if anything really surprised me, but it was just like it was so impeccably done. It was so eloquently executed. It's just like, it's kind of like it's when you I don't want to gush over everything, but it's
gush away. That's what this podcast is.
Okay. It's when you have genius, you don't have to add anything, you don't have to take away anything.
Yeah.
Now I've experienced that with some of my other heroes, and I'm really hard on Sammy Hagar. Really hard on him because we know what he's capable of, and there's times that maybe he doesn't hit that, and
there's times he doesn't even get into the same area code as that.
Yeah,
right?
And then when we covered Ross' solo career,
yeah,
there was some, it's like you're better than that, and but I never experienced that with Petty and Campbell. It's just like, oh, okay, well, you went from, this very immaculate production with Jeff Lynne, and now we got Rick Rubin, and you executed both flawlessly.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about Breakdown. I mean, it's again quintessential Petty and the Heartbreakers. It's got a great guitar hook, and it's because I wanted to give you 8 tracks where there's some stuff where I thought, well, you'll know that one, and we'll be able to have a conversation about that, because I think there's something about talking about a song that you're really familiar with versus a song that you're really just hearing for the first time. There's an interesting dynamic in that sometimes with how you approach even talking about it. But I just wanted to kind of give you a background on Breakdown. The cool thing about that song is it was kind of an 8-minute song when they were recording. It was this big sort of jam out session, and there was long. And when they used to play it live, it would quite frequently be a long session, and there'd be lots of guitar playing and lots of improvisation and vamping from Tom and everything. But the recording of it, Denny Cordell did finish it up, and they were playing it for Dwight Twilley. And he actually heard, and it was about 6 minutes in or something, and he heard that, and it was a throwaway one-time little improvisation that Mike had played, and
I had no idea.
Twilly said, "There you go. That's the thing. That's the song. That's what you should use." And so they rearranged it, Mike and Tom, and they sit down and they figure it all out. Call the band back in at 2 a.m. And now we record again, and we get there again. It's like a 6 or 7 minute or something. Then they edit it down to 2.5 minutes. But isn't that cool that you know that sense that as a guitar player, if you're taping yourself when you're playing and you're just messing around, as soon as you hear that, you go, oh, wait a minute, I can use that. That can be a song.
Yeah. I had no idea that that's what it was. That's because when I heard that, I pictured even like a woman, walking you through this song, like, oh,
Right.
this is how I want this, and and her moving to the melody and trying to emphasize that. That's I pictured a very feminine quality
Interesting,
with
yeah.
that, and that song seems to touch universally. It's you know, and and then the way it was captured, and it sounded like you were there in the room
Yeah.
with them as a recording, which takes me back to being in the living room and being in the center of all the
Yeah.
different music going on. And oh yes, it was a perfect track.
And it's cool too because on the first two records, especially, and then you get it every now and again on some of the later records, the way it's produced, because Mike always stood stage right of Tom. So it was always Tom, then Mike, and then Ben Montench. And I always think it's because Tom wanted to see them, he wanted to be able to sort of communicate non-verbally with them in one go, so he didn't have to keep turning his head, right? Because that's another band dynamic thing that you get into. But almost always on those early recordings, Mike's panned into the right, Tom's panned into the left. So it's almost as if you can sort of see them on stage, you know what I mean? Which I think is I don't all, we talk about this lots with Van Halen, but I don't always love hard panning. And they're probably panned about 70%. It's not 100%, but they're definitely panned over so that you can really hear those two guitar parts, which is super cool, when you're picking them apart. So, yeah. I sent you a live version of Don't Come Around Here No More because I wanted to, again, we talk about Mike always plays for the song. He's not the shreddy, look at me, look at me, look at me guy most of the time because he's quite a shy, quiet guy. But on that song, I wanted to sort of show that, during that Take the Highway tour, where they had the big tree, the big stage set up, and it was full theatrical production. So the lead into that song, of course, we get 3 different guitar parts that he's putting on a delay. And
Can I ask what year that was?
it was 80. Oh, God, sorry. I think it was 91.
That's interesting because I know
92, 91, 92, I think.
because music was really shifting at that point. It was getting away from sort of the 80s stage productions where even some artists had dancers and things like that. And
Yeah.
started getting back more into some of the jamming and things. And the 80s was the response to the 70s where the song had a very 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 long intro and
Yeah.
all the textures. But yeah, that's kind of what it reminded me of. Like, oh, I missed that element, when, and that started to creep back in during the '90s, where you had these, interesting intros or just parts between songs. And how many instruments did Mike pick up? Did he pick up different instruments?
Yeah, it's at least 3 or 4. And I was gonna ask you on the technical side because I know Brian May had that famous. He had his delay pedal that he built himself because he could play 3-part counterpoint on stage, right? He could play with himself on stage. And there's a similar thing there because there's a really hard repeat on. Mike plays that first thing and then he leaves it and it's just diddle in diddle and it's going over and over playing that sort of. It's kind of like an arpeggio, and then it cuts out at one point and then it comes back in. So clearly they've got that going through.
Sure. Yeah.
Like so, that's an echo. It's on like you get a unit that's just going to send the signal back through and keep going until you tell it to stop. I'm assuming.
Well, there's a old effect unit, like the old tape echoes, where you can record something, and he may have been using that. 'Cause I know they really liked like the old school gear, and it sounded like that's what he was using because everything had this real richness to it.
Yeah.
Which you don't quite get with, and particularly now with plugins. But there are certain things that like on an analog delay, you get the repeats kind of degrade a little bit, and they get a little darker and a little smokier, and
Right.
that's kind of what I heard there.
Okay.
Whereas the Edge, like the Edge is not going to use that. He's gonna have something digital. So when he hits up, they used him and the Edge use the same box AC30. But when the Edge is like hitting some harmonics and those are repeating, they get chimier and chimier um, as it repeats, flow.
Yeah.
So they're taking, um, the I guess with U2's music being so dense at times, he doesn't want that signal degradation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, again, two absolute masters of textures and layering
Yeah.
and making themselves sound like an army.
Yeah.
That's what I got out of that particular intro. That was fantastic.
It's super
I
cool.
was not expecting that. I saw this is a long version of this song. I thought maybe they did like a sing along back and forth with the audience or
Yeah.
something, but like no, this is little Mike's showcase.
Yeah, he's playing his bouzouki in there for a little bit too. But I was going to say with this song, it's one of those that to me, it's one of those rare examples where for me, because we've talked about this and we talk about this with our friends online, that for me a solo can't save a song. If a song's crap but the solo's great, well then to me it's just a great solo in a crap song, and I'm not going to love the song just because the solo's great.
Yeah.
But a great solo can really elevate a song, and to me, and the double time outro with the solo, that's the bit that Tom said, well, we need something else here, because it was a co-write with Dave Stewart. Of course, I'm sure you knew that from the Rhythmics. They sort of printed, it was written originally for Stevie Nicks, and they'd worked on it overnight, and Stevie came back in the studio and Tom had laid down the vocal and she said, well, I can't do it better than that. You take it, sort of thing. So which is kind of cool, right? But that solo section, when you go into double time, that's what makes the song. Because that's where you get, because up to then it's a very 80s, very synthy. You've sort of heard a lot of that stuff, especially from Dave Stewart. When that double time comes in, when that section comes in and Mike starts playing, that's when it really becomes a Heartbreakers song.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It sounded like almost like a song that may have been given to the Cars or someone else,
Yeah.
and it'll be fine. And then we're gonna it brings that element in. Someone that did something similar to that was Billy Idol with Eyes Without a Face.
Yeah.
As that bring in and then boom kicks in with that heavy guitar sound. And
Yeah.
again, these guys are all about the same age, born in the 50s and exposed to that same kind of music. And they obviously went different routes to express that. But those elements still creep in, which is perfect.
So with a song like that, where when the first time you listen to Don't Come Around Here No More, or when it's on the radio, you're not expecting a solo in there, right? Like it's actually kind of the last thing that you're expecting. And so we talk about playing for the song. There's a real risk when you do something like that people are going to go, oh, geez, that doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But I think, again, if we talk about how Mike plays it, and he's playing that one note for quite a bit of it, he's just sitting eighth notes on that one note. He's kind of constructing something sonically that, even though you don't think it's going to fit on its face, it's sort of, again, exactly the right thing for the song. So as a guitar player, and especially if someone's coming to you and saying, hey, Josh, I've got this song, can you figure out what to do here?
Mm-hmm.
What's the process for thinking, like, do you go through and try five or six different things and think, okay, that didn't work, that sort of thing will work, maybe I'll work from that base then?
This is something I got from Jakey Lee, who played with Ozzy.
Right.
And he said like, if he's coming up with a solo part or something, he'll put his favorite way is to put the tape on, and then he'll just hum something back and forth between it.
Right.
For me, I like to have some sort of beat, some sort of rhythm texture, and then I'll start, rather than, as a guitar player, we're taught to kind of play scales. And what I do is instead of playing for the scale, I play for the chord. So
Okay.
I'll find like a passing chord, and then play the third of that chord, and then use that as a beginning, like just a center where I can find a melody.
Right.
And Neil Giraldo brought up that he starts a solo with the last note that Pat Benatar sings. That's where his solo starts.
Right.
I wish I knew that. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'll try to find some sort of rhythm beat or something that kind of is a little bit counter. I mean, there's a lot going on there, so it makes sense that he just kind of hitting that one note and
Yeah.
then doing these little accents with it, because you're almost like it's like almost kind of opening up and closing the hi-hat
Yeah.
on the drums. So that those are certain things I'll try to find, especially if when you're playing with a dynamic drummer, and then I'll find my note with the bass player. That's
Okay.
something I took from Sammy Hagar. He said he finds his note with the bass.
Yeah. When
Yep.
when you were playing then, because again, if you're talking about, with Petty and Campbell, because they were so symbiotic together, they played off
Yeah,
each other. Do you prefer being in the room if you're playing lead with another? Do you like being in the room and be able to see what that guy's doing, or do you sort of, because there's lots of different ways of doing it, or do you prefer, well, give me your rhythm track and I'll go away and I'll figure that out on my own?
I like having people in the room, even someone that's not even associated with just an audience.
Right.
I like having them in the room, because
Is that
it's interesting to just see even just how they react or don't react. You
yeah.
know, I like having people there, even though I'm such a loner and such all those different things. I I like gatherings,
Yeah.
but
So
yeah, I definitely uh, prefer to have um, people in there. Like, and something else I heard is Ed mentioned to another guitar player. He said, "Oh, cut your solo live and then overdub the rhythm track underneath it."
interesting.
So you're
Interesting.
soloing with the band.
So that it feels counterintuitive, that doesn't it? It feels
Yeah,
like you would always do it the other way around.
yeah, yeah.
But
So he told the guy from Winger to do that. I mean that's worth its price in gold.
yeah.
To get something like that. So um, we're in such an information age that I'll take those elements, and I really like Jake's approach. But because even if I'm listening to the track, I still want the singer with me.
Yeah.
And like watching him react to my melodies, and I'm throwing over that, like, because especially if they just kind of take a little double take.
Yeah, because that's
Okay.
immediate. It's immediate
Yeah,
feed. It's immediate feed, positive feedback
yeah,
then, or negative feedback, where you
yeah,
think, oh, if they like that, because that is a visceral thing where you react to
yeah,
music, where you think that's cool, do that. What was
yeah,
that?
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
So
absolutely. So, even Ed mentioned that he thought "Ain't Talking About Love" was a throwaway riff. I'm like, no, we're going to use that. So, um, yeah, it again, music. It's just you know, I, I remember playing something, and it's like, no, this is major, and I'm playing minor here, and they're like, no, you play that,
yeah.
you know,
Well,
and
and that's the part that's, again, I think that's the part that's why it's fun.
yeah,
And like you said, I mean, we talk about, how do you learn technique, and well, you watch this guy and you watch that guy, and it's the same thing with songwriting. But at the end of the day, that way of writing, you can't, if you do that every time, if you do the same way every time, it's gonna end up being, it becomes a bit mechanical then. And so I think, the truly great players like your Jeff Becks and your Claptons and your Hendrixes, all those guys, they were guys who they would shake that up every now and again, take themselves out of their own comfort zone,
mm,
because that's where the real gold ends up being, right? Is where,
yeah,
well, I don't know how to play that, so I'll try and figure something out. And the mistakes often in trying to replicate it become the things that are interesting a lot of the time,
yeah,
right? So
absolutely. And it's so interesting because you'll hear these people that I just worship the sounds that they created. David Gilmour, I think he referred to one of his. It's like, oh yeah, when I first heard that, I thought that's dog shit. And I think that was Comfortably Numb or something, like a track on that. Like, really? Um, and and but people convinced me, no, we're going to go with that sound. And when you hear it in context with
Yeah.
everything layered on, it's going to sound amazing. Or even I've heard different players that said, like, yeah, my ears are just fatigued. Turn the monitors off. I'm just going to play,
Yeah.
and that can create a different result.
Yeah.
And or another one is even this actor. He came in for an audition. It was a voiceover part. It was I think it was 3 words or 4 words. It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno. And
Okay,
so
right.
and so they and that was his audition. He goes, okay, when do you want me back? Because no, that's our keeper. What? No, that's our keeper. And so and there's times when you don't really don't know, like, this is going to be official, this is going to be real, and you play something more authentic.
Well, that leads us in absolutely perfectly to Running Down a Dream. And I had to put this, I really, I tried to resist putting this on the list because it's almost like low-hanging fruit. It's almost too easy to talk to a guitar player about Running Down a Dream, but there's a reason why it's so iconic. And I just wanted, again, just a little bit of background in case you don't know this, that I'll read from Tom's book. He said the most incredible thing about that was the solo at the end. He says there was no one there but me, Mike, and Jeff. We were in Mike's tiny little studio in his house, so it was like set up in they were set up in the bedroom, cables running into the garage and whatnot. He said Mike was just sitting there with his head down, and that bit came, and he started to play. But he looked like a stone statue. He didn't blink or move, and he had his back to us. He said I remember Jeff looking over his shoulder and looking back at me and making this face like, is he really doing this? He says it was one take, and he played that incredible solo. So in that, again, that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Sometimes, and I think part of it is having the people around you to recognize that that's lightning in a bottle. We're keeping that. It's diminishing returns immediately. Don't replay it. That's perfect.
I've talked to another producer who was producing another hero of mine, and he said that this guy was convinced that he could beat that part,
Yeah.
and he said he actually couldn't. He couldn't.
Which is
But
that can be frustrating sometimes
yeah,
too,
yeah.
right? You know.
So sometimes you just need someone to come in there and, like, hey, no, you're done. We're gonna pull
Yeah.
the cord. You're finished. And that track, that was particularly an interesting track. So a friend of mine was working at Little Caesars, who was a dancer, was more towards leaned more towards like a Michael Jackson and people like that. MC Hammer at the time.
Right.
But they all loved that particular track. And I think it's because Tom Petty's vocals it's not a screeching Axl Rose, you know,
Yeah.
you just get this onslaught of guitar, and then all of a sudden you get this, voice in your face. And again, this is where, people are really complimenting each other, is where you don't have, the guitar is really strong in that song. I
Yeah.
mean, that's probably one of the heavier songs that Tom has written, but his vocal delivery was in a way that people can, embrace it.
Yeah.
And then the solo at the end, I believe Jeff mentioned probably just little hint, like, hey, why don't you do a little Blues Breakers clapping? And
Right.
then that's all that was needed.
Well, the cool thing too about working with Jeff Lynne, Mike talks about this, where he said, like, usually when he's working with Tom, we'd go in the studio and they'd listen to the play through the song, and he'd just react to it and figure it out. And he trusted his instincts of playing with Tom and knowing, roughly what he was going to come up with. And he might go home and then come in the next day again and they'd play again. So working with Jeff, he'd come in and Jeff would say, have you got any parts? And Mike would go, oh no, I was just going to figure. And Jeff would go, oh well, I've got an idea. I've got a couple of parts that I kind of figured out last night, and he would play them. So Mike thought, he said, well, if he's got parts, I'm gonna have to figure out parts so I can get my stuff on the record. You know what I mean? So that almost like a little competitive thing. But I was going to ask you about, or talk to you about, the thing. I again, with so many songs, you listen to Running Down a Dream and you think, how has no one written that riff until 1986, 86, 87? It's so simple. And it's just on an open E string, and then he did it. How's no one written that?
And that's the thing, is I think we think, oh, well, that can't be good because it was so easy or it came easy.
Right.
And or we need to make it so much, so much more complicated, or we go over something so much that it takes all the soul out of it.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I don't know anyone that can't hum that riff after hearing it once.
Right. Yeah.
And that's maybe that's that's the Haskins scale applied to a guitar riff.
Right.
Does it
Yeah.
entertain you? Does it stick in your ear? And I think that's another simple riff that we talked about. Ain't talking about love,
Yeah.
you know, and something Ed was embarrassed about. So,
Yeah.
oh,
They're almost like the both of them share a similarity too, though, right? Where they're sort of single note.
yeah,
There's no chords in there. There's no you're not playing double stops or anything. It's just
yeah,
the single notes, and they're almost in that sense like I grew up playing piano, and they're almost like Chopin's etudes, where they're almost like practice pieces that you would give to like running down a dream. You would give that to a guitar student and say, okay, what I want you to do is play an open top string, and then just go down the fretboard and hammer on, and that's what I want you to do. Just practice that, and then
mhm,
that comes out, and but it's this super, like you said, you can hum it. It's immediate. It's like I was talking to someone about Scott Haskin, our friend Scott Haskin, about "Shake It Off" by Taylor Swift, and whether
mhm.
you love or loathe that song, you only need to hear that chorus once, and it's locked in. You know it. You can hum it. You could tell someone about it. You could sing it for someone, and I think it's the same thing with "Running Down a Dream." That riff is just it's just sticky. It's glue, right? It's in there
Yeah.
immediately, which is cool.
Well, Smoke on the Water. You know,
Great example. Paranoid.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just and it's these hooky riffs, and even if you're listening to someone like Michael Jackson, his little things are
Yeah,
they stick in your ear. Or when we're listening to Michael Hutchence, with New Sensation,
yeah,
I mean he's basically singing riffs himself, you
yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
and I see love written all over your face. I mean, yeah,
You see, talk about, again though. Like I'll go back to that though. That opening, the riff from "Rain Down a Dream." I think it's one of those that, as a guitar player, it's also because there are licks and riffs that are just fun to play.
yeah,
Right. And again, and I think it probably is the easier stuff, right? Like like you said, "Smoke on the Water" or "Paranoid" or "Whole Lot of Love." There's not really much to those things, but when you play it and it's like if you're just learning guitar, and I'm
yeah.
like, oh, I can play "Running Down a Dream," and it sounds like running like down a dream. It sounds right. So that thrill of just being able to play something hooky and cool, it's worth its weight in gold, I think.
Well, when I was in high school at that time, we were always trying to write these things that were much more complicated. It's like
Right.
com- complex doesn't mean better.
Yeah.
Very rarely it does. And it's like, why can't we just write that? You know, not this. Yeah. I mean, we were trying to be what Dream Theater ended up being, but oh, should have stuck with the simpler things. Um, and again, with that, you don't want to have too much grit on the guitar, because then it just becomes a dumb metal song, or
Right.
it just becomes like everything else. And so you can still hear the character of, I mean, you can hear his fingers hitting the strings. You can hear the
Yeah.
pick hitting the strings, and you can hear, the pick string negotiation that's going on.
Right.
And there's so much to talk about that song. Like I never thought someone that was into dance oriented music was going to love that song,
Yeah.
was going to embrace that song. And then they're like, oh yeah, we love Pride and Joy. I'm like,
Right.
really? You guys like Stevie Ray Vaughan? Like, yeah,
I
yeah,
think to me, what that is, I think, is probably it's because it's just melody.
yeah,
It's got a great melody. And that's
yeah,
where, people, we've got lots of friends who are into, serious metal and all this kind of whatever. But there's nothing wrong with pop music. I love pop music, and pop music is popular for a reason. It's because it's got a great melody. You can hum it. There's nothing wrong with
yeah,
pop.
yeah, absolutely. And and as we look at our heroes, that there's always going to be that pop sensibility.
Yeah.
Even when we're listening to really complex music, some of the Dream Theater stuff's like, oh, there it is. There's that.
Yeah.
And or Rush. There's there's little snippets here and there that everyone knows, everyone recognizes.
Absolutely, yeah. And you have to have that. And like, again, that to me is always that thing that separates the truly. It's why McCartney is it's just god level, untouchable because, and he's still doing it. You know that new record he just released, "The Boys of Dungeon Lane." It's just like yeah, there's the McCartney melodies, and he's not recycling old stuff. There's some stuff on there that's got the '50s rock and roll and the '60s rock and roll. All his influences are still there, but it's a new melody that he's found. They're still coming out of that guy's fingers. You know, love
So,
it.
it's always been a mystery of being a songwriter to try to write something that's going to be catchy.
Yeah,
It's gonna stick. Because I've heard records that are flawlessly executed, but I don't really remember too much what's going
yeah,
on. And some of the records that we've covered, the records aren't bad. They're just not particularly memorable.
yeah. They're not. I mean, and I love dense music. I mean, I've got into King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
Hmm?
Some of that stuff, you're not walking away from some of that humming it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the sensation of being immersed in it for 45 minutes, an hour is just like, oh, give me this. It's completely different to what Petty and the Heartbreakers are doing, though, right?
Yeah.
So, next song is one of the ones that I thought, well, I don't think Josh will know this one. It's from Into the Great Wide Open. So, it's the next album after Full Moon Fever. Still Jeff Lynne, and it sounds
Mhm.
like Jeff Lynne. You can hear it, right? Again, lots of guitar in there, lots of acoustic guitar. But I wanted to specifically talk to you about this one because the solo in this song is one of those and you must have these too where you feel it every cell in your body just goes yippee
Yeah.
when you hear a certain part of music. There's just something about certain, and it's like I think that solo's 12 bars maybe, but it's 12 bars of music that just speaks directly to the center of my musical being.
That's a really clean sound, right? That's
Very, very clean. Yeah.
very, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I was really trying to okay, what were the ingredients you used for this? Sounds like some compression, a little bit of chorus, and that's where you could hear, and I believe he was doing some hybrid picking where he's picking and then plucking with some of his fingers,
Okay.
and then doing some legato and a little bit of
Yeah.
slide and stuff, and it when you hear the pick attack, it jumps, and then
Yeah.
the other stuff's kind of, but with the compression, it kind of brings it up a little bit of a nudge.
Yeah.
Uh, to describe that, it's difficult, but you can hear it. Some other players, have done something similar to that. Trevor Rabin, if you listen to his soundtrack work,
Okay.
he'll do things like that, and it's. I'm guessing Mike Campbell's like, okay, we're just gonna give all this ear candy. Here you go. This amazing, like, in this track, we're gonna give you something because it could have been very easily just putting in a very stock solo.
Yeah.
Some kind of Chuck Berry kind of bends, and
Yeah.
with the kind of a fuzzier Stratocaster tone, but this one is like, oh, this almost sounds like maybe even if you asked Chet Atkins or Jerry Reed to kind of step in here for a second, or Albert Lee,
Yeah.
which was, it's like, well, no, I'll do it, and that's the impression I got with it.
I love that because I love that you've picked up on all that. And I knew you would, you're a guitar guy and you know this stuff, but especially that, what I love about that solo is, first of all, it's just incredibly melodic and it's again, the perfect part of the song, but it shows that, when you're constructing a solo, there's the notes you play.
Mhm.
That's one part of it. But then, okay, well, am I going to pick each note? Am I going to hammer on, pull off certain notes? Am I going to slide? Am I going to slide up the fretboard, down the fretboard? And that solo in however many bars it is, it's got the lot. And
Yeah,
when he goes down that little run down that he does, he's he's picking some of the notes, he's sliding some of the notes. I think he hammers on one, you know what I mean? So he's got, and it gives the solo, it gives those notes, each single one of them's got their own unique personality, even within
oh yeah,
that little bar, which I just think is, again, that's why the truly great guitar players, that's what they do, either super intentionally or super naturally. you know, and I think both things are, when they're combined in the way that these guys do it, it just gives you that. It's like a vocal part that is, you know, it's like a Freddie Mercury vocal part to me. I listen to that song and I just think that is the best damn thing I've ever heard, you know.
Well, uh, a friend of mine used to catch Les Paul playing in New York,
Oh man,
and
yeah.
he would catch him once in a while, and he said, "Oh yeah, just you take a note and you bring it up and you bring it down and you paint it purple and you make it blue, these different colors and and he recorded it. And the only thing I said is like, oh, adopt me. I mean, thank you, Les Paul, but you know,
Yeah.
like you just it's they have so much time spent in this, and I think a lot of them that achieve this level, they got rid of the interference.
Yeah.
So that's where Tom Petty's gonna like, okay, yeah, we're gonna use this riff for running down a dream. It's a
Yeah.
simple riff. Yeah, we're gonna use it. Well, no, we're not gonna complicate it. We're gonna use this riff.
Yeah.
And then you at the end of the solo, you you do your best interpretation of Clapton, you know. And it's I know like in with like film writers and script writers, they just like, well, you get an idea, you you copy something that inspired you, and then maybe you have a beginning and middle, and you just fuck up the rest, and then that's what you're left with. And I get that these people have such confidence that they just don't they just don't hear the interference. They don't listen to.
Yeah.
And that's something as an artist I'm always battling against. Is like, oh no, I can do better, or this sounds cheesy, or this. It's like, who cares what they think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, play. Like you said it earlier, right? Play what comes naturally. Trust your instincts, because
Yeah.
again, your instincts are kind of what make you you. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we talked earlier about, I think it was Run Down a Dream. How's that not been played? We move on to You Wreck Me, three chords, ding, ding, ding. Again, okay. There are riffs that are those three chords, but they're not played
Oh
with
yeah.
that tone. They're not played at that tempo. They're not played with that specific feel. And again, it's that thing of how do you keep in music and in rock and roll, how do we
Yeah.
keep finding ways to play the same
Well,
three chords but make them different? You know?
well, that same those same chords I think were used in the Pretenders with Chrissy Hind, I believe. The
Yeah,
middle of the road, that
yeah,
one
I know
that
which one you mean. Yeah,
yeah,
yep,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and but that's a little more aggressive.
yeah,
But I want both those songs.
of
I want
course,
those
yeah,
both on my playlist.
yeah,
And that's and so I don't I know it's kind of popular to see, oh, I know where you got that riff from. I know where you got that song from. It's like, no, I want both. I want them all.
yeah, yeah. As long as you put your own spin on it, right? And again, that's where
Yeah.
I think that's where
Yeah.
tone comes in too, right? Where
Yeah.
okay, well, if I play, I know, and again, if I play full chords in first position, it's going to sound different than if I'm barring up on the fifth or sixth fret, or if I'm capoed, or if I'm if a different alternate tuning. So your voicing on the guitar then becomes important to that as well, right?
And I don't I'm not sure what Tom's trying to push across, but yeah, you wrecked me. Yeah. That's my it may be something
Well,
completely
okay,
different.
so the story behind that song is the lyric was "You rock me," and
Oh, okay.
he brought it to the guys, and they were all like, "Get out! That's terrible. That's a terrible line." And he knew it was a terrible line, and it was basically so the song was more or less kind of done. He knew the shape of it, and he had the rest of the lyrics. And then one day it's like, I know what it is. It's "You wreck me," and again, it does change just lyrically. It changes the whole meaning of the song, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
wreck me it's the finality of I'm toast. I'm just scorched earth because you're that good. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah. It's like, you rock me. Why don't you give that to the Thunderbird guys? So,
we'll give that to Kicks.
yeah.
If Dan Papathopoulos is listening. So. Okay, Don't Fade on Me. This was another song from Wildflowers.
Okay.
And
All right.
the
This
acoustic
is
one.
where I'm going to chime in with my connection with. Okay.
Excellent, excellent,
Okay.
excellent.
So, um, really good friend of mine. His name is George Trips, and he started a pedal company called Way Huge Electronics. Our
I
connection,
think I've heard of
yeah,
them.
our connection is the other guitar player in my uncle's band that was in the living room, Bill DeLapp, who made guitars
Right.
for Alan Holdsworth. Okay, so George told me one day, he goes, "I'm moving to LA. I've got this. I got this, pedals I want to make. It's either gonna be called Big Dog or Way Huge." I was like, Way Huge is much cooler, much funnier. And if you ever meet his personality, Way Huge is really gonna is gonna make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so and he's a fantastic player, also, a very astute at getting tones. And if you talk to him, he's not a pedal guy, even though he makes a bunch of pedals.
Right.
He's pretty much a straight through the amp guy. He goes, "You're not going to get a better sound than that." And so he's like, "Yeah, I'm making this pedal called the Red Llama." I said, "Well, I'll buy it." He goes, "You haven't even heard it?" I said, "I'll buy it." And he said, "Red Llama? Where'd you get that from?" He goes, "Oh, Monty Python."
Yeah.
And so he sold it, and he's like, "Yeah." Tim Pierce, he's a big session guy. And then he said, and then the next batch, Mike Campbell and Tom Petty are buying something.
Wow.
I said, "I'm finally ahead of the curve." And it's a pedal that's similar to a Tube Screamer, but
Okay.
doesn't quite have that nasally kind of cut off to it. It's a little more open, maybe a little less compressed.
Okay.
Not such a huge mid-range hump to it, and so it just made perfect sense. And you can hear it on the record. You can hear
That'll be on Can't Stop the Sun then.
on not that song, but you can hear it with the. I know Rick Rubin would love that kind of
Okay.
segment, but it's a little bit fuzzy, a little bit overdriven.
Okay.
It's just perfect.
Yeah.
And that the one I had is the one he hand painted and made in his apartment. So it was, but yeah, it was just, obviously, they gravitated. They're like, "Okay, yeah, we like that." He eventually did all the EVH pedals.
Yeah.
So Ed sought him out for that too. So.
Well, guitarists get given. This is the nice thing about being a high-level guitar player too. You get given pedals. People want you to use their pedal and tell them whether it's any good,
Yeah.
right? So.
Oh yeah. So it's and all this stuff becomes really connected, and and obviously you've heard Holdsworth. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Very discerning ears and things like that. So it makes sense that eventually, we'll have a connection with Mike Campbell and Tom Petty, which I thought was one of the coolest fucking things I ever heard. I was like, yeah, I got in the same batch. So,
That's awesome, man. Do you still have it?
I did sell it
Oh, okay.
for an insane price. I put it up, and it sold within minutes.
Yeah, because of what it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I would use, but yeah, it was just like, I told my friend, he went, "Hot damn, it sold for that much." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "How long did it take?" And I said, "Maybe a half an hour."
Yeah.
That I was posted. He goes, "Yeah, you probably could have gotten more." I said, "Yeah, but
Yeah.
I did okay on it." So
Okay, well let's get rid of all the pedals. Let's get rid of all the electronics, and we'll talk about the acoustic song that I sent you, "Don't Fade on Me," which again I think shows that side of. So the background for this one was that Mike was showing Tom the chorus section, dun, 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 that little kind of run thing, and Tom was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool," and it's a finger picking thing. So he went home and wrote the song around it, and they came back in, and they tried to record it, and they just couldn't quite get the interplay between the two parts because it's obviously a two acoustic guitar part song, and they said so they'd do it every night after they'd finished recording. They'd sit down and they'd try it again. And it was weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier is this take that they got that's on the record, as soon as they played it, they knew. So we talk about, Run Down a Dream was a one take. This was a 50 take, but they knew once they had it because they knew what they were looking for, but they didn't know until they had it. They didn't know what they were looking for until they had it.
That's so interesting because it's like a different approach to, you know, the the experience they had with Run Down Dream.
Yeah.
But I wonder what was about that take that resonated with them. Like, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Versus all the other ones.
Yeah.
I mean, they must have had like a real keen sense of vision to like, okay, we'll know it when we find it. We'll know
Yeah.
it when it hits us. Oh wow.
So Mike said that, from Mike's book, it says, I remember it was a hard one. It's in drop D tuning, where it's finger picking and modal sounding. He said, I put the chords together, gave it to Tom, and he wrote the song. We kept trying to record it, but it took us a long time to get the right lilt to the rhythm. He said, because the words were so important, but he's trying to find that exact, the flow and the bounce to it to make sure that it complemented and accented what Tom was singing over top of it. Because again, if you're a good musician, a good songwriter, a good parts writer, they
Yeah.
need to complement the song, and it's that first. And I think that's why it's like, well, we know it's good, and we know we'll get it eventually. So let's not try and force it. Let's not sit down for 7, 8 hours and just keep playing it. Let's just try and play it once at the end of the night, and we'll probably get it eventually.
Okay, so I'm thinking like they're kind of okay as a martial artist when you're trying to really learn a particular, you know, kata or something like that. The moves really sink in when you're tired.
Right.
I'm wondering if they're experiencing that writing this, like okay, we're going to do a rewrite when we're kind of, um, we put all our into the session, and at the end of this, we're going to, you know, nothing's going to be hanging over this. We're just going to be focused on this,
Yeah.
and then when it resonates, oh, such a fascinating. Tom has such a fascinating discography because how do you describe a Tom Petty song? You know, because
Which
there's
one?
there's so many. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some that are really heavy synth based, and then there's some that are very airy, and then some that are very roots rock. And
Yeah.
eh,
It was just in every. It was just. I always talk about this on the podcast, and then people who listen to my show are going to get sick of me banging on about this. But the thing with Petty, I find, is where he sort of sets apart from most of his contemporaries. Those old kind of, we call them legacy acts. Once they get into their 50s and 60s, really, when you go, they're just going to churn out their greatest hits, and you don't really care about the new album.
yeah,
Petty's songwriting kept getting better, and they weren't played on the radio, so they're not as ingrained in the public
sure.
consciousness. But the stuff on Wildflowers, the stuff on The Last DJ, the stuff on Mojo, Highway Companion, and even Hypnotic Eye, the last record, these are the works of someone who's still got a keen interest in what he's doing. He's excited by the craft and about songwriting and still finding new ways and new sounds to express, the things that are in his head, that's the sign of just a pure songwriter to me.
And so, and I've heard, I've followed different artists, and there's that embryonic stage you're hearing their songs, but
Yeah.
it always seems like his become fully realized. I haven't heard anything that I could say, oh, that was half baked.
There's, I would say there's two songs in the entire catalog where I sort of made that comment where I was like, it feels a bit unfinished. And there's a
Yeah.
couple of songs, that fall into that category on an album called Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, which was they basically recorded about half of it, basically just live off the floor with Tom
Mhm.
calling out the changes and sort of making it up on the spot, and then go back and dub a few things on. But it was that kind of, we want to get away from the 18-month production and the madness and all the cocaine and the millions of producers. Let's get back and be a band in a studio and just record, right? And so some of those have that thing where you think, yeah, it's cool and it's got its own vibe, but had you taken it and spent another 2 or 3 weeks, probably it would have ended up being a better song. So,
Well, a favorite band of ours, they had an entire record that was half baked. You know,
which one? There's a few.
regarding
Oh, good Lord, let's not
the
talk about
one,
it.
yeah. But I mean, that entire record was half baked.
Yeah.
But and yeah, that's what I find when Mark's like, how do you sustain that kind of creativity
Yeah.
over that time and not just like, okay, well, I'll I'll write another one of these songs and
Yeah.
present it.
Here's my
Uh,
template. I'll change,
Yeah.
again, and it's that thing of like, oh, well, two verses, let's do a chorus. Bridge goes there. You got a solo, it's in
Yeah.
E. Play 8 bars of Hoodla Hoodla. Okay,
And
that's
and
fine. But
and and
yeah,
we know this setup for Mike, worked on that track. It'll work on this track.
yeah.
And do these things. Um, and that, I mean, to go from Jeff Lynne to Rick Rubin is two contrasting different producers. It's
Well, one's a musician and the other one's Rick Rubin. So
yeah, and Rick Rubin's a reducer.
yeah.
Yeah, he's a reducer, and to yeah, and that's kind of when I listen to Tom Petty, it's like what you can kind of um, morph into uh, these different like stage setups, but you're still going to be uniquely you.
Yeah.
And to go from the '80s to and as you said, it was up until the end that he was putting himself. There wasn't a stalemate where okay, we're just gonna we're gonna play the Dirty Dozen each time
Yeah.
out. And that's what you're gonna get on record as well as in the set list when you come see us live.
Yeah.
So
Okay, well, so
yeah.
let's start wrapping things up a little bit,
Okay.
but I wanted to sort of ask you, one of the things that us petty heads get a bit frustrated with sometimes is when the conversations come out about what are the great American bands, you don't typically hear Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers getting when someone says, "What about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers?" Everyone goes, "Oh yeah," but they're not usually top of mind, especially for guitar bands. People say
Okay.
Allman Brothers, they'll come out. You'll talk about Van Halen, you'll talk about, and they don't. The Heartbreakers don't often get touted as a guitar band when they are absolutely a guitar band. And Tom and Mike, that's the center of that band with Ben on keyboards, and then a couple of different drummers, a couple of different bass players. But those two guitars, those Tom Petty and Mike Campbell, that's the band, man. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so for me, in terms of great American guitar bands, and especially, and you probably haven't listened to a ton of live stuff, they were a phenomenal live band and they were a phenomenal cover band. So I mean, you look on setlist.fm, there's a list of, I don't know, they probably did about, let's say 350 songs live over the career. About 100 of them are covers. Like they did Bo Diddley and they did the Stones and they did, the Guess Who, and they just covered everyone and nailed it because they were a really tight band and they were a bloody good guitar band.
Well, I've, many years ago, this is a different genre of music, but Klaus Meine from Scorpions,
Yeah,
he said, you're highly revered as a metal band, but you're never talked about in like the top tier.
right,
And he said, oh, because we're not an image band. We don't,
right,
you know, um, and I think people just saw Tom Petty as this incredible songwriter,
yeah,
and maybe they just never associated him being fashionista or some sort of someone that. And I don't remember Tom being very political or having some sort
not
of
hugely overtly, certainly not in
yeah,
public and not on stage, typically.
like you need to follow my
Right,
um, or even taking a strong moral stance against it seemed like he presented these songs that we could all relate with, or maybe even amidst our pain and our chaos, he maybe offers that clarity.
right,
But for me it does,
yeah,
and maybe that's why guitar players, or maybe even just music listeners in general, never elevate him to that top level. Like he's not Bono, or he's
yeah,
not Sting. Like
yeah.
because
But
that could be unbearable at
it is,
times.
but it is true though that I mean, if you look at you talked about with Don Henley, worked with Don
Yeah,
Henley. I mean, they were the house band for the Johnny Cash album, the Unchained
sure.
album, the American recordings, and Mike played with a bunch of different, Stevie Nicks. He played with a bunch of different people. So all of the Heartbreakers was massively respected within,
Oh yeah.
you've talked to guitar players who, have talked to you or talked to, our friend, any of our friends who play guitar in the and the podcast will rock, Jeff Brewer say, if you talk about Mike Campbell, everyone sort of goes, oh yeah, that dude's good. You know what I mean? So there is that sort of that recognition and that acceptance that he's great, but you just still don't hear about him. And I think maybe part of it is because he didn't put himself out front and center. He did
Mhm.
sit back and, Mike talked about it. He wasn't a session guy, really. He was Tom Petty's guy. So
Yeah.
all the parts he was writing those in case Tom found something that, because what Mike would do is he'd record like 20 different guitar riffs or choruses and verses or songs, whatever, and send him cassettes and say, whatever you think is good, let's work on that. Tom would pick two or three off every 5, 6 cassettes, and those would become
Mhm.
songs. And then Mike didn't do anything with the rest. He didn't shop them round. He didn't go out thinking, well, man, I'm Mike Campbell. I'm writing all these riffs. Maybe I should be this. Maybe I should be the star. He was the guy who wanted to be in a band, and he wanted to be in a band with Tom Petty. You know,
Okay. Um, yeah, I think it's because they were not they they didn't they weren't following trends. They weren't image conscious. I mean, thankfully they never went through a Miami Vice stage
yeah.
where they were those awful.
The soup's on a little. Just they flirted with it and then backed off from it pretty quick. Yeah, yeah.
you know, and Tom Petty didn't do a hip hop record or
Right.
things like that.
Yeah,
And when they collaborated, it always seemed to kind of make sense that they would, obviously we was Stevie Nicks,
yeah.
and but they didn't, suddenly do they didn't do a rap metal record with Limp Bizkit or something like
Yeah,
that.
you couldn't see them working with Shellback or Max Martin
Yeah,
or Bruno Mars or
yeah,
Pharrell Williams. You wouldn't have seen that, right?
yeah,
They wouldn't have gravitated toward that because that's sort of, well, that's the focus is on the commercial side of it. Then our focus is the music first,
yeah,
always the music first, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, and yeah, and I guess Mike it never sounded like he needed to really insert himself. Like I am the guitar player. I
Yeah,
am the guitar player for Tom Petty, and maybe that's something. Whereas, obviously someone that has a signature sound like Slash,
right.
or Ed Van Halen, that you're going to get that element that's going to jump out.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know, man. I think whatever corner Tom and Campbell painted themselves in, that's the coolest corner you could ever find. You know, so I mean, we can go for hours because
This is what we do, man. This
this,
is what we always do. Yeah,
because it all, and I'm sure when we when we turn, it's like, oh, I should have brought this up. I should have
of
brought that
course. Yeah,
up.
of course.
And that's what I love about discussing, in particular, just music in general, is that there's always something. I mean, we've bought records from many years ago, and we still go back and listen to them,
Of
and still
course.
like, oh, there's that. There's
Yeah.
and um and with whether it's with the podcast for rock or what we're doing here, there's always something. It's like, oh, that there's that little nuance that we hear,
Yeah.
and that inspires us all over again. And this is honestly, this is like hearing those records again for the first time,
Yeah.
even though we've heard it a million times. Oh, this has been perfect.
Well, definitely, Matt. Tell people where they can find the engine room, and let people know if there's anything coming up, any episodes coming up that you want them to listen to. What's going on?
Well, uh, I'm mostly trying to get guitar players to agree to come on my podcast, and it's like trying to get a drummer to come to rehearsal. And
Hey, wait a minute, wait a minute.
they're enthusiastic,
We're
but when it
busy.
comes,
We're busy.
yeah, when it comes down to it, it's like, oh, well, I'll figure out another time. But
Yeah.
basically, it's on, I believe, on the Boneless Network,
Yes.
and so you can find me there with a number of brilliant podcasts. I have a small thumbprint on there, so if you want to take a listen and learn more about gear, then that's a place for you, and maybe you can um, find something that's going to resonate with you, or if you want, you could find me on the socials, jcmlespaul@gmail.com. And that's my email. And you could hit me up, and, I'd love to chat gear. And, if you're wanting help with a track, or if you're wanting, just advice on what to purchase, I can work within your budget and, get you on your way.